Evan, you're Julie. Peter, you're right. Thank you. Joey, you're there. Frank, close.
Yeah, we have one more. Should I get started anyway? Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Can we please quiet down? We're going to begin now. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to our 2024 Candidate Forum for the 16th U.S. Congressional District. I'm Adam Dawes, CEO of the Embarcadero Media Foundation. The Embarcadero Media Foundation has a mission to enhance the quality of life and democracy in the Bay Area. We do this by publishing our 7 community-centered newspapers and websites, including the Palo Alto Weekly and Palo Alto Online, as well as the Mountain View Voice and the Almanac. We'd like to thank our partners, Palo Alto Neighborhoods, the Mid-Peninsula Media Center, and the City of Palo Alto for making this event possible. Tonight, we're excited to host a debate between 9 candidates for the U.S. congressional seat being vacated by Anna Eshoo. This is a rare event as Eshoo has represented this part of the peninsula for over 30 years. There has not been a primary for an open seat since 1992. We're delighted to be able to hold this event in person with a live audience of community members. This is one of the few events that makes this possible and is a welcome return to normalcy since the onset of COVID 4 years ago. We strongly believe that such openness and access to our elected officials is important to the democratic process and hope the public will see the value in this and support us with respectful behavior. There are so many national and international issues that our community cares about and that our future representative will have to engage with on our behalf in Washington. Tonight, we have a lot of issues to cover and to better understand these candidates, and the ground rules are critical for getting through our agenda as efficiently as possible. There will be no audience questions during the event. We have solicited the public for questions in advance, and those have informed the questions prepared by our moderators. These chambers are tight, so there will be no signs, banners, placards, or noisemakers. Please remain quiet and do not give applause or make commentary during any of the proceedings. Audience members who do not respect these rules will be asked to leave. Let me now introduce our moderators for the evening. Gennady Shaner has been a staff writer for the Palo Alto Weekly and Palo Alto Online for over 15 years, where he focuses on local government, housing, and transportation. Zoe Morgan has been a staff writer for the Mountain View Voice, Palo Alto Weekly, and Palo Alto Online since 2021, where she has focused on schools, youth, and families. Our moderators will explain the format of the debate and will ask their opening questions to the candidate. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you so much to everybody in the audience for coming here and everybody streaming this. Just a few words about how we set this up. Before this debate, we asked everybody to fill out a questionnaire with 28 questions on all sorts of topics. And you could find the grid with their answers in the back. We've used this grid to prepare our questions because we want to focus on things on which these candidates differ. We also relied heavily, as Adam mentioned, on questions submitted by readers and audience members, and they were excellent, and we want to thank everybody who contributed to that. So we're going to go alphabetically for. Thanks. Is this better? We're going to go in alphabetical order for the opening statement, and for the rest of the questions, we have randomly selected an order of the first speaker and then go alphabetical from there. Each candidate will also receive one question unique to them during the debate. One more housekeeping thing. We have one candidate, Council Member Julia Lifcott-Hames, who has a flight to catch and has to be out of here at 8:45. So if we're running a little late or if we haven't gotten to the closing statements, then we're going to let her make her closing statement at that time. And the last thing I want to mention, yellow cards. Everybody has a yellow card that they could use one time during the debate. They could basically jump in and have 30 seconds to add anything they want to another candidate's question or answer. And if they use those 30 seconds to criticize another candidate, that candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. Okay, let's get this party started. I'm going to kick things over to Zoe for the first question.
Thanks, Gennady. So all of the candidates were provided a question in advance for their opening remarks. For candidates who previously held elected office, we asked, what significant and controversial position or vote did you take while in elected office that you now regret, and what caused you to change your mind? And for candidates who haven't held elected office, we asked another version of the question, which is, please share an example of a time when you changed your mind about a significant or controversial public policy matter or issue, and why, and what caused you to change your mind. For opening statements, we have a minute each, and we're going to go alphabetically. So we're going to start with Joby Bernstein, who will be answering the question for those who have not before held elected office. Thank you.
Get started. Does this work now? Whoa, cool. Technology. After years of working and investing in policy, I changed my mind that we need fresh voices, not conventional politicians, to bring new policy ideas, business experience, and ties across the aisle to represent us in DC. I've watched this state succumb to the most devastating effects of climate change, from wildfires to drought. I've watched an education system that has become out of reach for too many, from preschool to college. And I've seen some of the smartest friends from abroad come here to study and yet get kicked out due to visa problems. We are losing what is most vital to us: our environment, our neighbors, and our children's future. But I know there is so much that we can accomplish. I want everyone to see the natural beauty of this state, like I was in awe on my first backpacking trip in the Sequoias. I want everyone to see the talent that can come from abroad that can make this country a better place.
Thank you, Joby.
And so to clarify, what is the position on which you changed your mind?
That it's time for young people to run for Congress, and it's important.
So before you had a position that you did not want young people in Congress?
I thought that business and investing could do it, and there would be fixes outside of it, but there's enough that we need to do in DC to fight the issues we care about, and now's the time.
Thank you. And next up, Peter Dixon, also answering the question for those who have not held elected office before.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to see everybody here. I'm Peter Dixon, and I'm from here. I grew up here. I'm raising my family here. And this is where I left to go serve in the Marine Corps after 9/11. So I served in the State Department under Hillary Clinton, and I served in the Pentagon under the Obama administration. Given that I had a idea that defense spending was in the national interest and more defense spending was a great idea. After having seen it up close, I can tell you that that's not true. And this is not a small issue. When it comes to Congress, the most powerful thing that they have is the power of the purse. And 54% of the discretionary taxpayer dollar at the federal level goes into the defense spend. That overwhelmingly fails to deliver for the troops and fails to deliver back here for Americans at home. What we need to do is bring American capitalism and competition to that.
Thank you.
In order to free it up.
Thank you. And for all the candidates, if you could speak directly into the microphones, we make sure all the people at the back can hear. Next up will be Sam Liccardo answering the question for candidates who have been elected before.
Thank you. And I want to thank all the community partners for convening us, and thanks each one of you for being here. I know at a time when our democracy is under threat, democracy is alive and well here in Palo Alto. So thank you. Back in 2012, I was serving as a council member in the city of San Jose, and I had the opportunity to support an increase in the minimum wage of $2. And at the time, I represented a district with a lot of small business, immigrant-led and small businesses that were really concerned about how that would affect them during the Great Recession. As we all know, a very tough time for small businesses. And although I supported an increase, I had problems with particular elements of it. And rather than work with the folks who were advocating to try to make it better, I opposed it. And that was a mistake. And in 2016, I recognized that mistake because even that, I knew that minimum wage that had passed was not enough to deal with the very high rents everybody was grappling with. So we led an effort, I led an effort, and other cities participated as well. And now our minimum wage is $17.50. I learned the importance of working together early to try to find a better solution rather than just opposing.
Thank you. And next up, Evan Lowe will be answering the question for candidates who have held elected office before.
Thank you very much and good evening. My name is Evan Lowe and I previously served 8 years on the Campbell City Council and as mayor and currently serve in the California State Legislature, serving my 10th year in the legislature. The question about helping to assess a mistake or reevaluating a position that I've taken was that of redevelopment agency. I see a lot of local government officials here. Redevelopment agency was a tool that was utilized by local municipalities as an incentive to develop on commercial and residential. The state of California eliminated the redevelopment agency without a substitute or an alternative, thereby leaving cities without the ability to help invest in these areas. And what I would help ensure that we would have done is to help advocate for an alternative or to reflect a revision to help ensure that we empower local municipalities and giving them the tools necessary. We need to act, assess, and adjust. And we did not adjust accordingly, which leads us to our problem. How do we help ensure the state is a partner versus an adversary in the state and local control?
Thank you so much. And next up, Julie Lithcott-Hames, who will also be answering the question for those who have held elected office.
Thank you. I'm Julie Lithcott-Hames. I proudly serve on the Palo Alto City Council. Normally I sit over there, but today I get the mayor's seat, which is awesome. I regret how I made decisions when I was younger. When I was younger, I wanted to convince everyone I was right. Now that I'm grown, I know that you get so much farther if you demonstrate respect and seek to listen and learn. Case in point, when I was elected to this city council, I wanted to be on a new ad hoc committee the city was forming to work with Stanford more effectively. I'll never forget the Saturday afternoon when Councilmember Burt called me and said, "You want to be on this committee? Want to hear the history?" I said, "Absolutely." Three-time mayor, I knew I wanted to listen to him and learn what he had to say, and I had a lot to learn. I finally stated my thoughts. I demonstrated I've been listening to him. The tone turned. He said, "You know what? When you were running, I wasn't so sure I could work with you if you won." And I said, "You know what? I wasn't so sure I could work with you. But here we are working together, talking for 45 minutes about this city we love." I know how important it is that we demonstrate respect and kindness when we're trying to reach compromise. That's how I lead. That's the lesson I've learned.
Thank you. And just to clarify, what position was it while you held elected office that you disagree with now?
Were you anti-Burt and then turned pro-Burt?
I don't regret a decision that I have made from the dais.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, Ahmed Mustafa, who's going to be answering the question for those who have not held public office before.
You know, everyone knows housing in the Bay Area is expensive. As a women's rights attorney, witnessing my clients go from women's shelter to women's shelter changed my perspective on the urgency with regard to housing stability. We need short-term and long-term solutions. From the single mother who can't afford rent, to the worker who is successful but may not achieve the American dream of purchasing a home, to those facing unhoused dilemmas. We need to change the status quo today. We need rent control. We need to expand the number of housing across the Bay Area. And we need to know that these solutions, they are not just solutions, that they are lifelines. So we need officials who treat housing like it is a human right.
Thank you. And to clarify, was housing an issue that you previously held a different position on?
I didn't understand the intersectionality of how housing affects different people. So, you know, there's the obvious problem of high rent, but there is the intersectional problems with regard to different communities of which we haven't heard from. And we need to hear them and we need to amplify those voices.
Thank you. Next up is Peter Otake answering the question for those who have been elected before.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I grew up here, in fact, next door in Menlo Park, raising my family here. And when I served on the Menlo Park City Council, I approved the third Facebook expansion in 2016, in which Facebook offered to build a hotel, and we approved it at the time. I regret that decision because I was the first mayor in Menlo Park in 20 years to get a housing element passed in the city. I rezoned the empty car dealerships on El Camino until close to 700 apartment units that are now opening. I rezoned the Bayfront area of Menlo Park to include 4,500 housing units. So I have encouraged housing in Menlo Park even before even the face of voter opposition on it. I funded our police with COPS grants and supported community policing and reduced crime
you.
with then Chief Robert Johnson, now the sheriff. I also balanced
Thank
our
you.
city budget every year and paid
Okay,
down
Mr.
an
Otake.
Thank you.
unfunded pension.
We had a minute, so.
Yes, unfortunately,
thank
we're
you.
going to move on. Thank you. Next up is Joe Simidian, who will be answering the question for candidates who have been elected before.
Thank you very much. I'm County Supervisor Joe Simidian. During my first term on the Board of Supervisors, when our county council, our legal counsel, left the county, we had to pick a replacement. And frankly, the department had been struggling. The vote to pick that replacement, a woman named Ann Ravel, was 4-1. I was the only member who voted against Ms. Ravel's appointment. And my thinking at the time was, well, she had been the number 2 in a department that had been struggling. I wanted to get a truly fresh start. A year later, I had to pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way, I think you've taken this department a long way. I want to applaud the work you've done. She said, thank you. She went on to become the chair of the State's Fair Political Practices Commission and later the chair of the Federal Election Commission. My vote was well-intended, but I made the wrong judgment, and I am happy to admit it tonight. Sometimes you have to give people a little time to show what they've got, and that was one of those
Thank you.
times.
Thank you. And lastly, Greg Tanaka answering the question for those who have been elected before.
Thank you. And thank you guys all for coming out on a rainy night like tonight. As a Palo Alto City Council member, my decisions have always been driven by extensive research and listening to our community. I do this through my weekly office hours that maybe some of you guys have attended, that I live stream. And this is not just a formality. It's really crucial for me to hear from the community in order to shape my decisions and be informed and balanced on issues like urban development or environmental policy. In regards to past regrets, due to my diligent approach and research and community engagement, I can confidently say that every decision I made, I have no regrets I made from this dais. In public service, it's vital to avoid hasty decisions. My commitment to being well-informed and considering diverse opinions is critical. And as we move forward, I commit to doing this in U.S. Congress as well to make sure that the community's interests are truly met. Thank you.
So to clarify, there have been no decisions while in elected office that you have changed your mind about?
Not from dais.
Okay. Thank you all for your answers. And now Gennady will take us to the first question.
Great. And if you thought sticking to a 1-minute time limit, it was hard, wait until we get to the next round where it's 45 seconds. But this is going to be the first of our 2 domestic. Sorry, there's a lot of you. The first domestic question is about climate change, which many of you listed as your top priority or one of your top priorities. But as the grid shows, you have very different positions on some of the specific policies. And we're going to go alphabetically. We're going to start with Peter Dixon and then go from there. And so one area of disagreement is the idea of prohibiting new homes and commercial buildings from connecting to natural gas. On the candidate questionnaire, Peter Dixon, Sam Liccardo, Julie Lithcott-Hames, and Ahmad Mustafa expressed support for the idea, though some had caveats to their answers. So the question is, why are you in support or opposition to such legislation? Go ahead, Peter. 45 seconds.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I was enjoying, I think, some of the answers here where I think it's like when you're applying for a job and they say, tell us your weakness. And you go, my weakness is I try too hard. So yeah, on connecting gas to homes, I think it is totally reasonable and consistent with what we have done throughout time to make sure that things that are unhealthy in the home and things that impact kids negatively are disconnected from the home. We see that, look, I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I constantly see product recalls. Same thing here. It's an easy call.
Great, thank you. Sam Liccardo.
Thank you. We have to rapidly transition off of fossil fuels, and the path to do so is to get on the grid. And we need a lot of investment in the grid to make it more resilient and reliable, but we have to get onto the grid. I was proud to lead San Jose at a time when we were the largest city in the country to require all electric new construction of residential and commercial buildings. I believe it's critical, and we need to address the challenges in federal law, which are currently creating real preemption problems for cities that have chosen a similar path.
Great, thank you. Assemblymember Lowe.
I do support. Similarly, commensurate with the state of California, the Air Resources Board helps to develop a number of policies, which also includes all electric of new buildings by 2030. But what is also equally important, though, is that we address and acknowledge the fact that not everyone has access with resources in underserved communities. So how do we get to clean energy while also helping to ensure that many communities may not be able to afford many of the technologies that we have and the infrastructure alike. So again, in support of the direction of the state of California, we're also recognizing the importance of making sure that the clean economy works for everyone as well.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Lithgow-Hames.
Thank you, Gennady. First of all, I want to say how great it is that the Inflation Reduction Act has really been such a champion for clean energy and clean jobs, and we're already seeing real pivots in manufacturing and construction. I am in favor of sunsetting our use of natural gas. It is essential that we stop burning fossil fuels. However, electric appliances are more expensive, and we can't leave people behind. So in Palo Alto, for example, we have a pilot program that's asking residents to voluntarily switch out their water heaters for an electric heat pump water heater. Pilots are a great idea to help bring a community on board and help people feel more comfortable. On bill financing also helps people deal with the expense of these transitions. And finally, we have to figure out a way to subsidize communities that don't have the resources, that don't have the wealth to do this. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mustafa.
Absolutely, and we must do so. Okay. There we go. Absolutely. And we must do so in a sustainable way to ensure that our communities can do this and thrive. Oftentimes, with regard to climate change, the brunt actually is faced by our most marginalized communities. And so if we do this in a way that is sustainable and take steps to get there, then we actually protect those very communities who are precisely affected by the harms of climate change. So this is a must do, but we must do it, just like everyone else here said, in a smart way, in a sustainable way, in a manner that we can get there by launching steps such that the brunt and the short term and the future isn't harmful to our most marginalized communities.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Otake.
Yes. So I believe climate change is real. It's an existential threat. It's a very high priority. There's no question about it. But I also believe that climate change incentives are far more powerful than climate change mandates. And I'll give you the example, which is the natural gas appliances. I'm opposed to the ban on natural gas appliances because if you put all these appliances onto the grid, our grid, even in California, is still 40% natural gas power plants, and nationwide, it's 60% gas powered, plants, right? I believe as a congressman, we have to do federal incentives to get renewable energy in our grid completely.
Thank you. Supervisor Simidian.
Thank you. And speaking of renewable energy, I want to say I am the author, as a former state senator, of the renewable energy law that requires California to get 33% of its energy from renewable resources. And that does raise the question then of, is the grid, the thing that carries the energy, up to the task? It is not. it needs to be if we're going to continue to press forward with renewable energy at the state and national level. So that will be a priority for me as a member of Congress. We also then, if we have intermittent sources of energy, need to find a way to store that energy, which means battery capacity has to grow, grow, grow. If we do all that, we have the ability to keep growing our renewable energy portfolio and really take a dent out of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'm really, I think climate change is really critical. This is one of the reasons why, for myself personally, I came here on a bike. I bike almost everywhere just because it's one of the biggest sources of carbon output in terms of people driving. With that said, while I believe electrification is a great long-term solution, we have to be practical about it. There's economic concerns, as was mentioned before, but also in some places like rural areas, natural gas is the only viable solution. The other thing to consider is the fact that we have intermittent power through wind and solar. So at night, when we're charging our Teslas, a lot of times what it's doing, it's booting up a natural gas power plant somewhere in Central California that's emitting a lot of carbon. So we're thinking we're electrifying, we're thinking we're doing good, but we're actually causing more carbon output.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sticking to the time.
Sorry.
Oh, I apologize, Joe.
Forgot the climate candidate.
I'm sorry. Please.
You're good.
Still
So
around
as someone who's worked in climate policy in 3 different states, I've worked in climate investing, advised climate startups, tried to start my own. This is a very nuanced issue. Creating a ban, what it does is, right now electric stoves are actually cheaper than gas, so I think there's some nuance there. But the problem is that the people who are still on gas pipelines, they will see their gas prices skyrocket. So the individuals who can afford to build new homes or can afford new construction, they'll benefit and see amazing decreases. And we have a grid that's reliable enough to get it done. The problem is everyone else who gets left behind. California Public Utility Commissions will keep upping their rates and they're going to suffer. So as a climate candidate, we need to be very thoughtful about policy that's going to work for everyone in this state.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we're going to get to the next part of our debate, which is what we loosely refer to as the hot seat questions, which are tailored to each individual candidate. We're going to go through 3 of them now, and we'll hit 3 more later and 3 more after that. And unlike the last round, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond, which I know is going to feel like an hour after what we just went through. So we selected randomly the order. So we're going to start with Evan Lowe, then Joe Simidian, and then Julie Lifcott-Hames. And so, Assemblymember Lowe, I want to ask you about the state travel ban. You famously authored in 2016 a bill that banned state-funded travel to states that adopted legislation that discriminates against LGBT individuals. Last year, that was repealed, and many people said it's not really working. Tony Atkins had a repeal bill and in passing that, she mentioned that the state travel ban led to polarization. You were one of the few people who did not support the repeal. So can you explain your position, and do you still believe that was the right approach? And if so, how do you respond to the assertion that it contributes to polarization? And you have 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Thank you very much. As an openly LGBT candidate, I refuse to be discriminated against based on sexual orientation. And in fact, when we think about the policies that have been implemented, over 500 pieces of anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation have been introduced in this country just this calendar year. And the most vulnerable in our populations are being discriminated. And what we're talking about is going to a number of states in which there will not be public accommodations. You can be criminalized and denied service by going into a public accommodation. So that is the essence of what we're talking about, how to protect public taxpayer dollars going to supporting states. And in fact, by the way, this was supported and followed that of private sector companies. Private sector companies said, we will not withstand the type of discrimination that NCAA, Salesforce, Apple talked about not going into these states. Unfortunately, because of that period of time, much has gone into place in which now we've seen this popped up. At that period of time of that piece of legislation, we had 11 states. Unfortunately, we're up to more than 26 states that discriminate based on sexual orientation. So what is important is to recognize this clear notion. You cannot legislate people like me out of existence. And that's what we're standing up and fighting for. That is what we are dealing with right at this period of time. That's why I've authored legislation to enshrine protections for same-sex couples to marry that all of us will be voting on this November. But that's the reality that we're dealing with. We need to fight and we need to be strong, but also need to be making sure that we are advancing our issues as well.
Great, thank you. So if elected, would you not travel to those 26 states?
Well, I
If you're-
think
if you're congressperson?
it's an unfortunate reality now that we have to go in knowing that we won't have those public accommodations. So an individual has to make that decision that there will not be public accommodations, and a healthcare provider can be legally prevented from seeing you and treating you as well.
Thank you so much. And now I'll let Zoe go next.
Next up, Joe Simidian. You have the longest history in elected office of anyone on the stage and the closest connections to the outgoing candidate, Anna Eshoo, who has endorsed you. Given this, what would you say to voters who believe that it's time for a new generation of leadership in Congress and who want a candidate who better reflects the diversity of the 16th Congressional District? You have 90 seconds.
I would say that it is time for a fresh perspective, that I offer that fresh perspective, that's what I have done. It's what I'm doing right now, and it's what I'll do as your representative in Congress. Look around, take a 1 mile walk, take a 2 mile walk. Look at the teacher housing that's going up. Absolutely innovative. Look at the Alcove Center providing youth mental health services that's open today. Absolutely innovative. Take a look at the housing for folks with developmental disabilities that is going up. Again, innovative, current, now, breaking new ground, literally and figuratively. Look at the first health clinic in this county's history in the 5th supervisorial district. All of that is about doing the work right now with energy and ingenuity. And that is exactly the approach I will take to the United States Congress, where I will not sit for 10 years waiting to accumulate seniority. I will be ready on day one. That's the way I've done my work to date. It's the way I'm doing it now. And it's the way I'm going to do it in 2025 when I hope to arrive in Congress as your representative.
Thank you.
Thank
Back
you.
to you, Gennady.
Great. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, when you were running for the council in 2022, you said you were motivated to get involved because you wanted to add more affordable housing, improve youth mental health, and support climate change initiatives. More than a year later, the city still does not have an approved housing element. It hasn't done much on mental health yet in the past year, and it's only completed about a third of its climate change objectives for the past year. So clearly there's some unfinished business. And how would you respond to people who are concerned that you haven't even finished a full term in office and are already seeking a different office? In 90 seconds. Thank you.
I would say that makes me disruptive, and there's nothing more Silicon Valley than a disruptive candidate. I would also say that, compared to what? A lot of cities haven't passed their housing element yet. We're working hard at it. In the meantime, this city, this set of leaders that I have the privilege of working with, including Pat Byrd, who I wanted to say at the end of my last statement, has not only become a trusted colleague, but a mentor. Working with staff and the community, we have voted to expand our safe parking spaces for unhoused people. We voted to raise the height limit on El Camino and San Antonio. We voted to increase density, floor area ratio. We are trying to make it possible to build denser housing here so that more people can live in Palo Alto, from the unhoused to those who need extremely low income housing, low income, et cetera, all the way up to the missing middle. So we have made tremendous progress in this city, frankly, by empowering the electorate to understand the issues more so that they can sort of vote locally and in concert with the signs they have in their yards expressing their values about welcoming all. In terms of climate, we've got this heat pump water heater pilot program. We've only got 250 of the 1,000 done, but that's 250 more than we had last year. And on youth mental health, I've been proud to champion an effort called Young Minds Celebrated, pop-up events in Palo Alto where youth can just come and perform a song or make a speech and be themselves. And it's not about what grade you got. They do this in front of a very appreciative audience, which really does help their mental health. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So if you're elected to Congress, can you assure voters of 16th District that you would serve out your term completely?
When I'm elected to Congress representing the 16th district, I will work my tail off for this district the way I'm working my tail off to serve the people of Palo Alto.
Thank you. We will now go to our next domestic question, and we will
Yes.
go to Zoe.
Thank you all. The next question is about tax policy. We will begin with Ahmed Mustafa, and then we'll go alphabetically around the corner. On your candidate questionnaires, the 9 of you expressed differing views about whether you would support taxing capital gains as regular income. Evan Lowe and Julie Lithcott-Hames were in support of the idea. The other 6 candidates, possibly 7 candidates on stage, were opposed, although Bernstein, Liccardo, and Mustafa suggested other changes to how capital gains are taxed. Currently, long-term capital gains are taxed at 0, 15, or 20%, depending on income level, and capital gains held for less than a year or short-term capital gains are taxed as regular income. Would you oppose or favor taxing all capital gains as regular income, and why? And the first question will go to Mr. Mustafa for 45 seconds.
Yeah, we should have long-term.
Your mic.
We should have long-term capital gains such that billionaires do not have the loophole with regard to income. So oftentimes what will happen is billionaires will not have an income, and what they will do is they'll just wait and they'll sell their stocks, right? And so that's a loophole. And so we should cap capital gains even further. And then with regard to regular people, I know people here in the Bay Area that are waiting to sell their stocks so that they can afford their homes. That hurts me. I know people that are literally waiting to sell such that they can have a bedroom for their children. And I think we have to recognize people in the Bay Area and the struggles that they face here with housing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next up, Peter Otaki.
Yes, so I'm opposed to increasing the capital gain tax because any economists will talk about that's a double taxation. So the profits are taxed at the corporate level. Your stock gains are based upon the future earnings that's already been taxed. So therefore, you're paying, it would be a second level of taxes that are being paid on it. Having said all that, I do think it's important to incentivize long-term holdings and to encourage investment. So that's why I'm fine with the 20% or 28% capital gains tax.
When you say the 28% capital gains tax, what are you referring to? Because long-term gains are taxed at between 15 and 20%.
Yes, it used to be 28%, and I'm comfortable with
Your mic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And next up, Joe Simidian.
Thank you. I indicated that I did not favor this specific change to the tax code because if you change the tax treatment of long-term capital gains, you disincentivize, you discourage investment capital from flowing into longer-term propositions. And you don't want to do that here in Silicon Valley. The flow of capital into long-term investments is what's made this valley prosperous, not for all, not for all. So to the point that was made earlier, yes, we need to close tax loopholes, but looking at each one of these piece by piece, one by one, doesn't really look at the big picture of tax reform. I'm glad that Congress is voting tonight to improve and upgrade the child tax credit, which was another question you asked about.
Thank you. And next up, Greg Tanaka.
I'm also opposed to this because it is double taxation, so that's a big issue. But fundamentally, what we have to be focused on as a government is actually increasing the economic pie, increasing the economic opportunities. And the way we increase the economic opportunities is by encouraging people to invest in our community, to invest in startups, to invest in entrepreneurship. In fact, if you look at the S&P 500, the US stock market, the vast majority of the wealth that's been created has been through startups, not companies that are really old. And so by doing this double taxation on capital gains, you basically discourage this kind of risk capital to go into startups to create this wealth that creates opportunities for everyone in our society.
So to clarify, you support continuing the current level of taxes on long-term capital gains?
Correct.
Thank you. Next up, Joby Bernstein.
Thank you. I think Peter stole a lot of my answer, but capital gains needs to be reformed, but not taken away. I think for individuals over a certain income limit, capital gains, and that's when that serves their version of work and they're not earning income from their work, working in private equity or VC, those capital gains should be taxed like income. But for individuals who are earning under $100,000 and are invested in the stock market, it makes no sense why we should be disincentivizing them from saving money instead of spending it today. So we need reasonable policy that ensures that the people who will benefit the most from lower capital gains taxes actually do receive those benefits, and those who use it as a source to earn billions are getting taxed appropriately for their income that they're earning.
So to clarify, you favor taxing long-term capital gains as income for high-income earners?
High-income earners when it's their sole source of income.
Okay, thank you. Peter Dixon.
So I actually built and scaled a tech company, and I bootstrapped it over 10 years. And really what allowed me to finally achieve scale. And we solved $1 billion defense and national security problem that was costing a huge amount of taxpayer dollars. The ability to do that was predicated in no small part on venture capitalists and others taking really strong bets in us. And so I think putting a wet blanket across the innovation economy, which is powering this ecosystem, is a huge mistake. And so having a public benefit corporation like mine, similar to Etsy or Patagonia, it was key. So I don't want to kill the golden goose here.
Thank you. Next up, Sam Liccardo.
Warren Buffett famously said that he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. He said it's wrong. I think we all know that's wrong. We need a fairer tax system. I don't support the idea, however, of making long-term capital gains rates equivalent to short-term. And I think there are many other ways to make this tax system fair. One of them might be, for example, if we really value long-term investment, let's change the threshold between short-term and long-term from 1 year to, say, 2 or 3 years. So we're truly incentivizing long-term investment over speculation, and we're rewarding the investment in this country we know that will produce jobs and long-term growth.
Thank you. And next up, Evan Lowe.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yes, I am in support. Part of the question becomes, what is public budgeting and what is equitable in our communities and a society? And when we're talking about the state of California, for example, that we last year were in a record surplus to all of a sudden in a record deficit because of the reliance on capital gains and income. And in fact, California used to be a manufacturing state, no longer is the case. So there have been many proposals that I've also helped to co-support and sponsor, which is to lower the threshold and lowering sales tax to have more ongoing revenue stream as well too. But ultimately it's about equity, answering the question of equity at hand, and how do we help ensure that our public budgeting is focused on known entities, less volatility.
So you would favor taxing long-term capital gains as income? Thank you. And next up, Julie Lithcott-Hames.
Can you remind me what the time limit is on this question?
45 seconds.
I'm trying to keep track.
Thank you.
All right, great. Yes, I am in favor of taxing long-term capital gains as regular income. I think we have to ask, why do we even have taxes in the first place? It is to fund what government provides: schools, roads, electricity, affordable housing. We have such wealth here in Silicon Valley, and yet so many people left behind. I believe everyone should pay their fair share. Our income tax is regressive. I believe we should increase the income tax on multimillionaires and even a wealth tax for those beyond that. And the elephant in every California living room is Prop 13. Yes, I want to protect our homes as residential homeowners. It's great that we're not taxed at the current value of our homes, but corporations also are assessed at the initial value of that land when they purchased it. Billions of dollars are being prevented from going into our coffers. We need split roll on Prop 13.
Thank you. And you also favor taxing long-term capital gains as income, to loop to the beginning?
Yes.
Thank you. We are now to the second hot seat segment. So in this segment, we're going to be asking Greg Tanaka, Ahmed Mustafa, and Peter Dixon for their answers to our questions. First up, and just a reminder, this is going to be 1 minute and 30 seconds to each candidate. First up, Greg Tanaka. In a closely divided Congress, one vote has the chance to be the difference between a bill passing and failing. As a Palo Alto City Council member, you have often voted against typically uncontroversial items like adopting the city budget or electing a mayor. What would you say to voters concerned that in Congress, you might sink your party's efforts to pick a leader, pass a budget, or even keep the government operating to make a symbolic point? You have 90 seconds for your answer. Thank you.
I love that question. So I believe my duty is to the people. A lot of times people vote with their party or some sort of group because it gives them extra power. You get committee assignments, you get extra budget, or you get to be mayor or whatever it happens to be. But I believe the reason why we should serve isn't to gain our own political power, to gain clout in Congress, to get clout on council. Our duty is to serve the people here, to serve the people. That's why we should be here. And so when I vote, I only think about how does this benefit our constituents, not how it benefits me politically, how it lets me be mayor or lets me be on some sort of committee. But I think our duty as electeds is really to make sure that we're looking at the people's best interests, not my best interest, not our political career. So that's why on city council, while a lot of people will not vote, will not go against the flow, I have no problem doing that because I view my duty is to the people, not to what helps me politically. And so if I go to Congress, I will do a lot of analysis. I will talk to everyone from every point of view, like I've done on city council, to really understand what's best for the community. And then I'll decide based on that in terms of how I will vote. I'll not vote something because it's Democrat, vote for something because it's Republican. If Republicans have a good idea, I'll vote for it. If the Democrats have a good idea, I'll vote for that. But I'm not going to be stuck to the party lines because I think this is the fundamental issue with our Congress. It's one of the big reasons why I'm running is because so far people stick to party lines instead of voting what's best for the community. And I hate that.
Thank you. Back to you, Gennady.
Great. And the next question is for Ahmed Mustafa. As a candidate, you're supporting several really ambitious policies, Medicare for all and a global treaty to govern artificial intelligence that we discussed. If elected, you would be joining what will likely be a very deeply divided Congress, a body that over the past year has been barely able to pass budgets and keep the government running. Do you believe your goals are realistic? And if so, what would you do as a newly elected Congress member with no prior political experience to turn these goals into reality?
I do believe these goals are realistic. And the biggest thing is you have to try. You have to really try to accomplish these goals that you're trying to set out for. And you have to listen to people and hear their voices. That's one of the biggest things is right now, many people feel unheard and unseen. And we can't stick to party politics and stick to certain terminologies to pass things. We have to listen to everybody. We have to hear everybody, ensure that people's voices are heard in the halls of Congress. With regard to ambitious policies regarding a global treaty on tech, that's something that's very reasonable. It's very realistic. All you have to do is talk to people. And when we talk to people about ensuring that we have guardrails for AI, and instead of following particular data policies in other countries, our tech companies should follow a global treaty on data, such that everyone is aligned. And when we put these ideas, we should ask if people actually support these ideas. Now look at the chart, and you'll see that barely anybody here in the chart supports a ceasefire in Gaza, for example. But the majority of Americans, the majority of Democrats support a ceasefire. The majority of Republicans support a ceasefire. So when I say people's voices should be heard in the halls of Congress, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We want to be able to hear the candidate.
Quiet in the chamber, please. Quiet in the chamber.
When I say people's voices should be heard in the halls of Congress, I mean everyone's voices, so nobody feels unseen and unheard.
Okay, our time is up. Thank you so much. We will go to the next hot seat question.
For the final hot seat question in the segment, Peter Dixon. As a Marine Corps veteran and former CEO of a security company, you've made defense spending and defense technology a key part of your campaign. This, of course, includes artificial intelligence, a topic that is sparking both great enthusiasm for the efficiencies it could bring, as well as deep concerns about issues like deepfakes, algorithmic bias, and the impact of automation on workers. You've said that you support working with the tech industry to craft regulations on artificial intelligence. What specific regulations would you favor, and how will you ensure that these regulations are effective, given that you will be working with the same people who you are regulating? You have 90 seconds to answer.
Thank you for that. I launched my campaign with an ad that used artificial intelligence, and something that would have taken tens of thousands of dollars and months of work to develop, we were able to do in 72 hours and for a fraction of that cost. So AI is a tool like any other. It can be used for tremendous good. It can also be used for tremendous harm. And we've certainly seen that. The ability of individuals to now act with nation state capabilities to influence our elections is something that we should all have great concern about. And so having good guardrails, and I think what you saw in that ad is we actually listed out there that AI was being used. It's those sorts of things, those sorts of guardrails that are necessary to make sure that we're taking the right approach. Now, here's one thing I will say about AI is that it's predicted that AI is going to cause a loss of 20 to 40% of the jobs that we're looking at as a society. We have to think about that, and we have to figure out how to deal with that as a society. One of the things that I talk about in terms of where do we get the money? And I think any politician who is promising you things, whether it's domestic issues or national issues, kitchen table issues, without telling you how to pay for it, is full of it. So when I talk about defense spending, that's because that's where the money is. And so that's why I want to be able to get the money from there to deal with these issues. One of those is how to expand opportunities for national service. Because if we have AI, we don't need to rush people into the workforce. And so expanding opportunities for national service is the way to deal with that.
So just as a follow-up, what specific regulations on AI would you be in favor of?
Yeah. So after Google pulled out of working with the Pentagon, there were a number of different policy positions that the Pentagon actually put forward in a working group. These were cross-jurisdictional things, and so they didn't get picked up by Congress because the Pentagon and others realized that we had to have good rules of the road in order to continue to lead here, to lead in an ethical way that validated the sanctity of human life on the battlefield. And so those things were not going to get picked up by Congress. The group that I co-founded helped pass that into law. So when I talk about working on Capitol Hill— So what restrictions would these be
in particular?
Yeah. So particularly around this, you have to look at how do you take the ethics and morality of us as an American people and bake those into law. And so we did things like create a cyber coordinator that was charged at the national level with dealing with issues around AI to work through exactly this sort of thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We now go back to our regularly scheduled questions. Next is our first question in foreign affairs, and Julie Lifcott-Hames will be the first person to answer. So for our first topic, on your candidate questionnaires, all of you except for one, Greg Tanaka, were in favor of continuing military support for Ukraine. In Congress, negotiations have been underway over legislation that would tie funding for Ukraine to new U.S. immigration restrictions. What specific changes to immigration policy, if any, would you be willing to vote for if it meant continued funding for Ukraine if you were elected to Congress? And we're back to 45 seconds to answer. Julie, you're up first.
I'm not sure if that's a foreign policy question or a question about the Republicans. I am tired of the Republicans using immigration as a political football. I am tired of them shipping human beings from the southern border on planes and buses to other cities. They're making fun of people. It is absolutely, utterly disgusting. I am in favor of unclogging our asylum courts with better funding for humans to be able to ask for asylum and then have a path to live in this country, maybe what they call a humanitarian parole, where they have the chance to not be in the shadows, but to simply be here legally while they await their asylum hearing. So I am not in favor of compromises on immigration in order to appease Republicans on Ukraine.
Thank you. Ahmed Mustafa, you're up next.
Yeah, we cannot afford to continue to militarize our border, and we must treat people like human beings. We must pass the DREAM Act. We must reinstate particular pieces of DAPA and expand asylum laws, not to just count for people escaping persecution from a government. It should also count for people escaping persecution from drug cartels. It should also count for people who are escaping persecution from climate change. These are common sense policies, and we have to be humane about how we see humans. We must be humane about how we see people. There is nothing that should differentiate me from my classmates who grew up undocumented, who were with me since preschool. There is nothing that should distinguish us.
Thank you. So would you accept border restrictions in favor of increased funding or continued funding for Ukraine?
No.
Thank you. And next up, Peter Otaki.
Yes. So I think this issue of linkage between immigration and Ukraine is an example of the failure of Congress to get its job done. This is an issue that immigration that's been in front of Congress for 20 plus years. Came close once but still with the lifting of Rule 42 about a year ago. The volume has increased 300,000 in December. It's now a humanitarian crisis. This should have been solved a long time ago with comprehensive immigration reform that includes everything from border security to also asylum courts and processing and a guest worker program. And trying to do it in 2 weeks doesn't make any sense.
So you would not favor border restrictions if it got continued funding for Ukraine?
What I would favor is comprehensive immigration reform. If that passed because of Ukraine, fine, but it's comprehensive.
Thank you. And next up, Joe Simidian.
We don't know what the deal is. We literally don't know what the deal is. So asking us, would we support or oppose when we don't know what deal will or won't be forthcoming, really, I think, begs the question. Let's see if we can find some areas of agreement. I support comprehensive immigration reform. Absolutely right. The system's been broken for a quarter of a century or longer. I support additional funding for our asylum system. We've got 3 million people who need to be heard. Surely Democrats and Republicans can agree on the rule of law. We need to have both secure borders and an immigration system that treats people with dignity and humanity. Whether we can get comprehensive immigration reform after 25 plus years remains to be seen. We're at a point where we're going to have to ask ourselves, can we find some relief for DACA and Dreamers? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
And I'll take your yellow card in just one moment. To clarify, the question was, are there border restrictions you would support if it would get continued funding for Ukraine, given that they are currently being tied?
I support funding for Ukraine. I think it is the morally right thing to do, and I think it's the smart thing to do for America's interests. If the conditions are acceptable, then the answer is yes, but we don't know what the conditions are, and that was the point I was making at the outset. Without knowing that, you can't really answer the question of whether or not you support the conditions till we see what the conditions are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ahmed, we're going to take your question at your yellow card at the end of the round. I appreciate it. Greg Tanaka, you're next.
So we're a nation of immigrants. I'm a fourth generation American from my dad's side in California and second from my mom's side. And as a nation of immigrants, we should make it easy for people to immigrate to our country. The fact that people have to come here illegally is a travesty. A lot of countries have work permit programs where it's automatic. It's automatic entry. If there's a job, you're able to do the job, you're in, right? It's not complex. You don't have to hire a bunch of lawyers, spend $10,000, do a bunch of rigmarole. We need to make that happen. It's inexcusable. We need people to do the work in our country. There's people that in need. And the fact that we just don't have this doesn't make sense. So we need to accelerate that. That needs to be a focus. If elected, I'm going to be focused on that, making sure that's easy for people to come to our country illegally. The border should be much easier to come through than it is now.
Thank you. And to clarify the follow-up, you're the one candidate who on your questionnaire did not support continued funding for Ukraine. Can you explain that position?
Absolutely. So we have to think about why did Putin invade Ukraine? One of the big reasons why he invaded Ukraine, this is what a lot of people talk about, is NATO. So as with the fall of the USSR, country by country is becoming part of NATO. And as NATO approached the doorsteps on Ukraine, I think that provoked Putin. And so I think what we need to do is we need to think about all the people's treasure that we're wasting in Ukraine, the homeless people that we have in our country. And we also risk nuclear war with Russia, which I think is very dangerous. So what I think we should do is we should figure out how to get a ceasefire there where maybe Russia keeps the Crimea, right? They keep some of the territory that they have, but we keep it as a buffer state where it's not part of Russia, not part of NATO, but that we can move forward without risking the lives of people through nuclear war. Thank you.
So to be clear, you think assisting Ukraine's survival is a waste of money?
I think if we say that Ukraine will not be part of NATO, and we let Russia keep the territory that it got, I think the war could stop. I think we could stop the war.
Thank you. And next up, Joby Bernstein.
I'm a strong supporter of Ukraine. We must continue to support them. Some of my closest friends, Alex, Andre, even Misha, who's in Kiev right now, it is extremely important that we continue to support their democracy and we stand up against dictators, because someone's going to need to stand up against Putin. When it comes to immigration, though, we don't really need to compromise. We've seen a lot of bipartisan support on immigration issues. The Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, the Northern Triangle Border and Stabilization Act, the Central American Reform and Enhancement Act, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. These policies have seen bipartisan support. If we are able to get more legal immigrants into the US on visas, there will be a lot less illegal immigration for us to worry about and a lot fewer undocumented immigrants, and it could make a significant difference.
So to clarify, you would not be in favor of restrictions on immigration if it got funding for Ukraine?
We need a stronger border, but it is a very clear stance that, like right now on the border, a ton of immigrants are coming from China and India that we're apprehending. It looks very different than it did 5 years ago. So if we are able to actually let people in a fair way, let them join our society who want to contribute, I can promise you the issues we're facing on the border will recede significantly.
Thank you. And next up, Peter Dixon.
Yes, I'm in favor. Zelensky tried that. Zelensky tried that. Before Russia invaded, he said that they would not join NATO in order to try and deter an attack. This idea that it was an expansion of NATO, these are Russian propaganda talking points that you typically see, frankly, more on the MAGA side of the Republican Party. What are we talking about here? This is a dictator who did a war of choice against a peaceful country. The idea here that we won't stand up as Americans and fight for this is just absurd. So I'll tell you what it means to be an American and fight for things. I had folks in my platoon in Afghanistan who were immigrants to this country who had already gotten their American citizenship and believed much in the American dream that they went overseas to fight for it, and 2 of them didn't come home. Immigration is not our weakness as a country, it's our strength.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam Liccardo.
I also passionately agree in the importance of supporting Ukraine. With regard to our border is in chaos. We need both border security and we need comprehensive immigration reform, starting with more than 12 million of our neighbors who have been building lives and families and communities here for decades who deserve a path to citizenship. I believe we can find middle ground by supporting more border security. I used to prosecute as a federal prosecutor criminal organizations that engage in human trafficking. We need more resources. We need technology, intel, Border Patrol agents. There's no reason why we cannot have more border security. At the same time, we have a fairer immigration system with more immigrants.
Thank you. So you would be open to restrictions on border security in return for Ukraine funding?
I am in favor of supporting more border security measures. I did not say I would support, for example, restrictions on asylum.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And lastly, Evan Lowe.
Yes. Thank you for your service, Peter. The answer is yes, I would support. The harsh reality that we're dealing with is that oftentimes the reality alters our ideology. This is about ultimately governance. We're dealing in an environment in which Congress is divided, but how do we help ensure that we reflect our values and turning this into protest energy to electoral energy? So that is what we need to be focused on, helping to ensure that we get the majority in Congress so we don't have to compromise our values. But the reality that exists even is supported by the administration. How do we help ensure that we are advocating for our American values abroad and domestically here at home?
Thank you. And now I think we have a yellow card from Ahmed Mustafa. You'll have 30 seconds.
Yeah, we do know enough about what the deal is. We cannot afford to compromise human dignity on one side of our country in order to protect others in another part of the world. Human dignity matters no matter where it is. And we cannot criminalize our people who are here near our border. We cannot have children in cages. I think this is a very simple thing. We cannot criminalize our borders. And that realistically, we have to look at deals realistically. That realistically is what the deal is. It's a criminalization of our border. It's increasing. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much. And we're now back to our third hot seat question.
Hey, I just want to thank the audience. You guys have been great. We'd really appreciate it if you don't disrupt with clapping because we want to get through all the questions in the time we have. So thank you so much. So we're back to the hot seat. So we're going to have a hot seat questions for Peter Otake, Joby Bernstein, and then Sam Liccardo. First, Mr. Otake, you're the only Republican on stage tonight and are running to represent a district that has consistently favored Democrats. If elected, will you caucus with the Republicans? And why should Democrats consider voting for you, given the chance of a closely divided Congress? And you have 90 seconds.
Really is a hot seat, isn't it? All right. So let me tell you why I'm a Republican. First of all, a fiscal conservative. Secondly, I want to keep our communities safe. I want to keep our nation secure. And I also want to make the future opportunity for my kids to be as good as what I had growing up here on the peninsula. And I want to emphasize that before Anna Eshoo, this district was represented by Tom Campbell, Ed Zhao, Ernie Conyu, and Pete McCloskey, all moderate, what is called Silicon Valley Republicans. I believe the country, half of the country is represented by Republicans. Most of the country is moderate. And as we all know, they kind of shift back and forth. But the point of this is that people on this dais, whoever gets elected, has to work with Republicans. And to do that, you've got to understand Republicans and engage in dialogue. I don't think many of you have been in either the assembly, it's been a supermajority, right? And I think it's important to reach out across the aisle because we've had 25 years plus of polarization in Congress, and therefore nothing gets done. I would caucus with the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is 64 evenly split Republicans and Democrats.
Well, thank you. And I see we have a yellow card and we'll get back to it. But Republicans currently have a narrow control of Congress. Just to follow up on that, do you see a lot of reaching across the aisle of the sort you're speaking about when you're mentioning?
No, I
Congress people?
agree. There hasn't been reaching across the aisle by other party.
So-
And it's been true for a long time. And that's why I think it's important not to have a career politician going to Congress who's thinking about the next step of their career and is going to toe the party line.
Mhm.
You need someone who has experience working in a bipartisan fashion, much like I did on the Menlo Park City Council, in order to achieve and get things done for the sensible middle, most of Americans who don't have a voice.
Great, thank you.
Let's take the yellow card now before we go to the next
Oh,
hot
yes,
seat.
sorry, thank you. Assemblymember Lowe, please.
How could you be a Republican in this environment, in this period of time? You can't compromise with crazy. The Republicans are not holding Donald Trump accountable on the insurrection, on coming back and helping to dismantle democracy as we see it. Gloating on the fact that they stacked the Supreme Court to roll back protections for Roe v. Wade that have rolled back protections that have been afforded for over 50 years. Then coming after interracial marriage on the Loving case. These are the fundamentals that we're talking about here. So to still have someone in our area identify as a Republican and saying that we're going to be effective in the Republican Party in the San Francisco Bay Area is unbelievable. And that's
Oh, I don't think your mic's on.
I feel like even though you didn't mention Mr. Otake's name, you did refer to him. So if you want 30 seconds to respond to that, you're welcome to, or we can keep going.
Well, I mean, my point is certainly I think the Republican Party is bigger than Donald Trump or any individual president. And I believe, and because I've grown up here, I've also been part of and been represented by very moderate Republicans who I think have had sensibilities and rationality. And I'd like to resurrect that going forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next up is Joby Bernstein. You have made climate change the main focus of your campaign, but on your candidate questionnaire, you also indicated you would oppose federal action to prohibit installation of gas appliances in existing homes. You'd also oppose prohibiting connection of new homes in commercial buildings to gas distribution systems, and also opposed added incentives for the purchase of electric vehicles. All of the other Democrats in the race support at least some, if not all, of these efforts. How do you reconcile this? You have 90 seconds to answer.
Thanks, Zoe. Great question. Yeah, I think it's surprising seeing the climate candidate actually oppose some climate measures. We need to be first addressing the issues that matter most. So for instance, when it comes to electric vehicles, right now, we actually don't need more incentives. We need more electric vehicles in this country. There is a continual shortage, continual problems in the supply chain. 85% of materials that are in electric vehicle batteries are coming from China. We've seen continual slowdowns in production that have been inhibiting the uptake of these electric vehicles. So if we want to electrify the grid and make a difference, we need to bring manufacturing back to America. We've seen this problem where in California, we have the best innovation when it comes to climate tech. This district has, one of the largest amount of climate startups, and we're also crushing it when it comes to actually implementing climate policies. But we have this middling out where the manufacturing of our supply chain, we have shipped overseas. And this is a problem when it comes to reliability and ensuring that we can actually reach a green future. So it's time to actually bring manufacturing back, focus on those incentives to then make sure that all individuals have access to cheap power, cheap electric cars, and an electric future that will benefit everyone.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue against bringing manufacturing back, but are there any particular legislative efforts that you would champion if elected on climate change?
Yeah, easy ones. I list about quite a few of them on my website. But we need a carbon dividend system. Too often when people think about climate, they always think there's some trade-off that needs to be made. Like we need to give up jobs or growth. But instead, we could create a carbon dividend system that would put 85% of Americans, give them money back, and actually allow us to price carbon correctly. We can have more efficiency. We can have more conservation. There's very easy things that have extremely high return on investment that we're not doing, because people don't have the nuance in the policy to actually understand how to get it done. But I can promise you that I know how to get it done and I'm ready to get it done.
Thank you. And I go to Gennady for the final hot seat.
Yeah, this is for Sam Ricardo. During your campaign, you often talk about your record as San Jose mayor. One of our readers has a question about that and how it relates to transparency. In 2022, a lawsuit from San Jose Spotlight and the First Amendment Coalition forced the release of more than 100 previously withheld emails that you had sent or received using a private email account. The question is, can you explain your reluctance or refusal to disclose public records sent to and from your personal email while mayor of San Jose, which resulted in costly litigation? And yeah, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the critical importance of the Public Records Act to maintain transparency and accountability in government. And that's why, for example, when we had challenges with regard to, in fact, cities throughout the Bay Area had challenges with regard to producing police records after SB 1421 to actually ensure the media and the public had access to videos and so forth. I worked very hard to come to agreement with the Mercury News and others to ensure we could get that information out to the public. With regard to that particular lawsuit, I can tell you there were a lot of, we produced 9,000 pages of documents to one media source. They had objections, for example, over the failure to produce an email that was sent by an individual who said he was complaining about police corruption and involvement in another crime and feared for his life for coming forward. And I told him, okay, communicate with me on my private email, so that way we will not disclose your identity. That was, of course, supported by the law. Nonetheless, I understand there was a lawsuit, and I also understand there were issues over text messages as well, which were routinely destroyed as a result of settings on our phones that destroy them every 6 to 12 months. So we did everything we could. We staffed up our office to deal with thousands and thousands of pages of routine inquiries we had particularly from Spotlight, which routinely every 6 months asked for every single text and every single email we had. And it became a tremendous staffing burden to be able to produce all that. We did the best we could with 9,000 pages.
Okay, you mentioned one particular case in which you wanted to protect an individual's identity, but there were many, many emails
Yes.
that did not fit that. I mean, you had emails about like funding for nonprofits that San Jose was supporting. So why use your personal email for those?
Because we had problems with our Microsoft system at the time. We could not actually send, and this is what I said in the media, and in fact, several years ago. So we were having problems where if we were on a plane, for example, and you try to send something, it would get caught in the outbox and you wouldn't know until perhaps months later that the email never got sent. So I had problems using the system. I routinely used my personal email, and I produced records from that personal email. Thousands and thousands of pages of records from that personal email to which everybody in my staff had access. That is, who were producing these records, so they had the same access as before.
If everyone could please be quiet, we're going to get to a question about.
Thank you.
Quiet. Quiet in the chambers, please. Quiet in the chambers. Thank you. Everyone, please be quiet. For a few minutes, and we're going to quiet the chamber.
We would appreciate it if you let us do that. Thank you. Please be respectful. Thank you. Okay. This is our second question about foreign policy. Thank you, everyone. This is our final question of the night. What role do you think the United States should take in trying to end the war in Gaza? And
Do you want to hear the answer?
And would you support a congressional call for a ceasefire? And if so, under what conditions? You have 45 seconds to answer, and we're going to start with Greg Tanaka. And we'll please ask the audience to be respectful. Thank you. So I'll repeat the question. What role do you think the United States should take in trying to end the war in Gaza? And would you support a congressional call for a ceasefire? And if so, under what conditions? We're going to start with Greg Tanaka. And
I believe, can you hear me? Okay. I believe the conflict in the Middle East is a travesty. We see all the people being killed in Gaza. I think more people got killed in Gaza than in the Ukraine war so far. Likewise, we see a lot of people killed in Israel, and that's also not right. I believe the solution that we need to have is a two-state solution. The United States has a lot of influence in that area, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that Israel has security, because if they don't have security, they're not going to go for a two-state solution, and also that the Palestinians have a
Please stop interrupting.
And that the Palestinians have a state for themselves, because without that, there cannot be peace in the Middle East.
So to clarify, would you support a congressional call for a ceasefire?
Yeah, and actually, it's on the form already, but yes.
Thank you.
Joby Bernstein.
The last time I was in Israel, Hamas
Please don't interrupt.
shoot rockets.
Please don't
So
interrupt.
we can hear the candidate's position.
The last time I was in Israel, Hamas decided it was the right time to shoot rockets. And I remember all of us having to go into a
Please be
shelter.
quiet.
Quiet in the
candidate's
chambers,
response.
please.
The last time I was in Israel, I had to go into a shelter because Hamas, a terrorist organization, decided to shoot rockets.
Quiet in the chambers, please. Quiet in the chambers.
Please stop interrupting. Can we take
Thank
it
you.
again? Thank you.
It is, as someone who's been in Israel when we've been attacked, okay, by terrorists, imagine if you were in the US and another country decided to attack us. Israel is not a terrorist, it's the longest standing democracy in the Middle East. This is a democracy surrounded by 21 enemies.
Stop interrupting.
Please allow the candidate to get.
Please allow the candidate to answer the question.
hostages that Hamas is holding. Over 100. Why are you supporting to bring them home?
Please let the candidate finish. We want to be respectful of everybody's point of views. Please let the candidates speak. Take your opinions to the ballot box, please.
Please.
Stop interrupting. Let's finish this. Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah. Israel faces an enemy in Hamas that has genocidal ambitions against Israelis and against Jews. I stand by Israel in their fight to eradicate Hamas. As an American and as a Jew,
Quiet in the chamber, please. Let's let the candidates speak so we can hear from all of the candidates. They all have their own views, and we want to be able to differentiate their different views on this topic. So please give them all an opportunity to address the question.
it is my priority to enable a safe return of the hostages.
Sir,
from heart to heart across the land, release the hostages and take a stand.
Thank you.
quiet in the chamber, please. Please hold your applause.
Do not clap.
Quiet in the chamber, please. Quiet in the chamber, please.
Next up is Peter Dixon with 45 seconds. Everyone, we need to be able to hear the candidate's position.
Quiet in the chamber, please. We need to hear from all these candidates. You may disagree with many of them, but we need to hear from all of them.
Peter, 45 seconds.
I just want to thank the moderators for doing a great job under difficult circumstances here. Look, if you care about these issues, then you should care about hearing what we have to say on them and being able to vote. Exercise your right.
Hold your applause, please.
So here's what I would ask the crowd is, first of all, thank you. Thank you for caring enough to come out here and speak your mind on something that you care about. And I think regardless of which side you're on, we all here as Americans are coming from a place of wanting to make sure that civilian lives aren't lost on the battlefield. So first of all, let's
quiet in the chamber, please. Quiet in the chamber.
You have 15 more
I think
seconds.
uniquely on the stage, I have some perspective here from serving in the Middle East. I swore an oath to our Constitution after our own terrorist attack on America.
Quiet, please. Quiet, please.
I had operational responsibility in Iraq for a Palestinian refugee camp, so I've seen firsthand the plight of
Quiet in the chamber, please. Let him finish.
But I've also served alongside the Israeli Defense Forces.
Quiet in the chamber. Please let the candidate make his point.
That were overrun.
Can we please have order in the chamber? Please. Quiet in the chamber. Please allow him to finish.
Please let him finish. We would like to hear his answer. Thank you.
I've been to those intelligence hubs that were overrun. I've been to those communities where people were murdered. And Israel has a fundamental right to defend itself. I think.
Quiet in the chamber, please. Quiet in the chamber. Please. We need order in the chamber to be able to continue.
Let him finish.
Any politician who tells you that there's an easy answer to this is out of their depth. And I think all of us as Americans are praying that these negotiations go well and that the Israeli and American hostages can come home. Thank you.
Please hold your applause. Quiet in the chamber. Please hold your applause. Quiet. Let's move on to the next candidate.
Next up is Sam Liccardo with
Mayor Liccardo.
45 seconds for Sam Liccardo. Thank you.
Democracy is alive. I support the current diplomatic efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to negotiate an end to the fighting. We can disagree over words.
Please, order in the chambers, please. Let the man speak.
We can disagree over words about whether that's a pause or a ceasefire, but rather than
Please.
fighting over words, let's agree that we want to end the fighting. And everybody in this room,
Please, quiet in the chambers. Let him continue.
Response.
and one thing I'm confident everyone in this room should agree on is that we want to end the fighting for the sake of 2 million Palestinians who are rendered homeless, 600,000 of whom are on the brink of starvation, and 9 million Israelis who fear for their lives. We need to end.
Quiet, please. Quiet in the chamber. Let the man finish.
You have about 10 seconds.
I support the continued negotiation and hope and pray that there will be an immediate cease to all hostilities. And yes, that includes fighting by Israel to enable a negotiation that will enable release of hostages, immediate aid to be delivered to 2 million Palestinians who desperately need it, and hopefully a transition in the government in Gaza.
Thank you. Next up, Evan Lowe with 45 seconds.
I just want to make a mention that the individuals on this dais, we are literally running against each other, but we can adhere to basic principles of respect, and we would want the same from this crowd in creating a safe space for everyone. And
Please don't interrupt.
Please allow everyone to hear.
Please, quiet in the chambers.
Reference.
We pause your time.
Thank you.
Please, quiet. Let him continue with his point.
Please continue.
Thank you. You must embody the values of democracy and respect for one another in this environment. And the harsh reality is that so many in this experience that has just been displayed unveils the reality each and every day of the experience and the pain and suffering that actually this similarly happened in the People's House in the state of California and was shut down. And I hope that there can be respect and understanding of these issues. If we can do it, you can do it too.
Please, quiet in the chamber. And let the man make his point.
Okay, can we let him
We need to hear from the candidates who will actually have an effect at this in Washington.
And in answering the question,
Question about ceasefire.
Please let him finish.
and in answering the question, there are hostages. Israel has a right to exist. An individual like myself is celebrated.
Quiet, let the man complete his point. Quiet in the chamber.
Unequivocal in my support of Israel, and I would be beheaded in other places, not in Israel, of celebrated.
Quiet in the chamber. Please. Quiet in the chamber. Can everybody please settle down? Yeah. I need quiet in the chamber, please. Please, everybody settle down.
Okay, our next candidate is Julie Lithcott-Hames.
Are you done, Assemblyman Lowe?
Julie?
Quiet in the chamber, please.
Julie? You're next with 45 seconds, and if you'd like to add a closing statement to the end, we'll add that time too.
Salam, shalom, peace. I know that we are all in tremendous pain for different reasons. Everybody in this room is feeling a lot of pain. I'm feeling it too. I imagine my colleagues up here are.
Quiet, please. Quiet, please.
Please stop interrupting.
I articulated my views on October 11th before I was a candidate. It is in writing. You can Google Israel, Palestine, and me, and my name, and you'll find like 5 pages of what I said about this with a heart full of anguish.
Quiet, please.
On October 11th, I didn't have to be a candidate for Congress to care about this. I deplore the actions of Hamas on October 7th. Really, really. They butchered people, murdered people, raped people, and took hostages.
Quiet in the chambers, please. Please stop interrupting. Let the candidates speak. You can make your decision at the ballot box.
Actually, I did not know that would be.
We need to let her speak so you can make an appropriate decision at the ballot box.
I did not know that would be a controversial statement. I am also gutted by what the Netanyahu government has chosen to do in response to innocent Palestinian civilians, raining devastation down upon innocents who now face starvation, disease, and surgery without anesthesia, and bombing people in their homes does not set Israel on a long-term path to peace, and it is abhorrent what is happening to the innocent people of Gaza. America is Israel's biggest ally, and I believe should remain so.
Okay. Quiet, please. Let the candidate finish. You can take your opinions to the ballot box.
Allies share their resources.
Your time
And allies have to tell hard truths. The war in Gaza is inhumane.
Okay.
Stop interrupting, please.
Please let the candidates speak. Please let the candidates speak.
Yes. I call for a bilateral humanitarian ceasefire, for the return of hostages.
Thank you.
For the neutralization of Hamas, for the prompt delivery of food, water, and medicine to Palestinians, and diplomatic negotiations to reach a true two-state solution where all peoples of the region can live in safety, freedom, with self-determination.
Thank you so much. Okay, now.
Thank you.
And
Quiet in the chamber, please. Please hold your applause.
Would you like to give your closing statement now, since we're close to when you have to leave?
I appreciate that. It does feel at this point inappropriate for me to take time to try to put forth why people should vote for me when we're in the middle of a very sensitive topic. So I'm going to just say, if you're interested in more, I'm a mom running to secure a better future for our kids here in the district, here in the United States, and across the world. Julie.vote is my website. Thank you.
Quiet, please.
Thank you. Now, we're going to
Quiet in the chambers, please.
Okay, let's move on to our next candidate, Alma Mustafa.
We need an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
Quiet in the chambers, please. Hold your applause, please.
When we talk about, everyone on this stage is in favor of housing. But let's talk about housing in Gaza where 2 million people are displaced. Everyone here
Please hold your applause.
Everyone here is in favor of environmental justice. But when we say clean water in San Jose, we should also mean clean water in Flint and clean water in Gaza.
Please hold your applause.
When we talk about healthcare, we talk about healthcare for all here. We should also talk about healthcare in other parts of the world, and we can't be hypocritical. We must stand on human dignity, and we must state that the best thing for the United States and the best thing for all our allies, is a ceasefire in Gaza.
Please hold your applause.
Thank you. Our next candidate.
We need to move on to the next candidate. Please hold your applause. Please hold your applause.
Go ahead. Okay, Mr. Otaki, you got 45 seconds.
Okay. What's clear is everybody in this room believes in free speech. Everyone in this room believes in equal rights for women and men. And the reason why I mention that is the most repressive—
Quiet in the chambers, please.
The most repressive regime in the area, in the region, is Iran. Iran—
Quiet in the chamber, please.
Don't interrupt.
What you have to understand is that Iran is supporting all of these terrorist proxies, Hezbollah.
Quiet in the chamber, please.
And the most constructive role.
Please,
America
can we calm
play
down so we can hear from the candidate?
The most constructive role America can play.
Please don't interrupt.
Is to
Sorry,
keep
Mr.
this war from widening. And we have to act as a deterrent to Iran.
Thank you.
Please, quiet. Please.
Okay,
Can we hear from the candidate?
Supervisor Simitian, 45 seconds.
Thank you.
Before my time begins, could I ask you to repeat the question?
Certainly. What role do you think the United States should take in trying to end the war in Gaza? And would you support a congressional call for a ceasefire? And if so, under what conditions?
Again, please.
What role do you think the United States should take in trying to end the war in Gaza? Would you support a congressional call for a ceasefire? And if so, under what conditions?
I want to take the question in a slightly different direction since it's been addressed by so many.
Please let
Quiet in the
Please
chambers,
let him
please. Let the candidate address the question. You can take that to the ballot box.
We would like to hear his response. Thank you. Go ahead, Supervisor Simitian.
We've got to reclaim our humanity. I said at a prior forum, and I will say again tonight, the life of a 2-year-old toddler who is an innocent is no more or less precious when that 2-year-old toddler is a Palestinian or an Israeli. These clashes end up pushing folks to dehumanize one another.
Please let him finish.
That's not going to get us to a better place. It's not going to get us to a place where the suffering in Gaza no longer exists. It's not going to get us to a place where folks in Israel feel safe and secure. The United States should be playing a constructive role in bringing peace to Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and the larger Middle East. And that starts with having a sense, that starts with stopping the inclination to dehumanize one another based.
Thank you.
Quiet, please. Quiet, please. This is not a dialogue.
Interrupting. Yeah. Please don't interrupt. And also, the time is up.
And
if you want to wrap up the last sentence, that would be great.
My last sentence is, there's a reason I traveled to Egypt, to Lebanon, to Jordan, and the West Bank, as well as Israel. And the reason was to understand the larger context. Understanding that larger context is but a start.
Thank you.
Please don't interrupt.
Quiet, please.
Your time.
Quiet. Please, can we settle the chambers? We're almost done listening to the candidates with this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Simitian. We are now moving on to closing statements. We've nearly reached the end of the debate. To finish the event, each candidate will have 1 minute to provide some closing remarks.
Please.
Please stop interrupting.
If I do not have calm in the chambers, we're